Good morning, and welcome to the first virtual breakfast meeting of the year for the Greenwood County Democratic Party. My name is Bill Kimler, and I am the chair. Ladies and gentlemen, what a week we've had. When we start to plan our monthly meetings in advance, we often forget to appreciate how quickly things can change from day to day. Whatever topics were initially going to be discussed are quickly tossed out, scripts torn up, and then you just have to speak from the heart. 3, 2, 1. We have a full agenda today and some incredible guest speakers. So while I would like to start off with some reflections on this past week, I'm going to try to focus on the positive, as I'm sure you can get your fill of the horror in the Capitol from like 100 other places. We have an uplifting interview with the Greenwood County Diversity Group, one whose mission is very much in alignment with our own. Representative Ann Parks has graced us with a visit this week to give an insider's view about how Columbia works. Then the amazing Mandy Powers Norrell will share with us what it's like to run for office for the first time and hopefully inspire some of you to do the same. And finally, I'll provide our monthly updates on what's happening within the Greenwood County Democratic Party and open the forum to our Zoom participants. You will definitely want to stay through to the end. So let's talk about this past week. About the disgrace of the Trump-incited mob at our nation's Capitol building, what could I possibly add that you haven't heard ad nauseum these past few days? You've seen the images, and undoubtedly many more than what I'm showing on the screen here. We know where the fault lies. They were having a literal party while our Capitol building was being ransacked and our elected leaders running for cover. We're not impressed by those who are trying to say the right things finally. And we're not surprised that local representatives John McCravey and Billy Garrett, as of now, have been silent, even though they've used the exact same rhetoric that was repeated by that violent mob. And we're especially not impressed by Congressman Jeff Duncan, who empathized with the domestic terrorists. Sure, he also issued a mealy-mouthed condemnation of violence in a formal statement. But 90% of that statement was drawing a false equivalence with the protests over George Floyd's murder, outright lying that Democrats didn't condemn violence, besmirching Jim Clyburn's name, and twisting the U.S. Constitution to try to justify his ridiculous objection to Joe Biden's election, even when many members in his own party have rejected that upside-down logic. Words matter, Congressman. And let's look at the words you used in your statement. Antifa, Black Lives Matter, Maxine Waters, Clyburn, Democrats, Democrats, Democrats. You know what word you didn't use in that statement, Congressman? The man to blame, Trump. You did mention him once just to briefly remind us that yes, he was once escorted to a bunker for safety, although I need to point out he publicly denied it. So one of y'all is lying, but not once in the past 4 years, Congressman, have you ever called Donald J. Trump out on anything. And your silence on his responsibility for what transpired this week says a hell of a lot more than the hundreds of words of bull that you used to bore us. Okay, who wants to hear something positive now? Amidst all of that, we had some great news coming out of Georgia this week as 2 Senate seats flipped blue. And yes, we can never give enough credit to this woman here. I think we all know Stacey Abrams, and she is an absolute bona fide superhero. But I would also like to appreciate the work of another woman, LaTosha Brown, co-founder of the group Black Votes Matter, who also worked very hard to flip Georgia blue. Let's take a few minutes to hear her words, courtesy of Pod Save America.
To realize that the very thing, because I remember one of my friends, very good friend of mine in California, who I love to death, was saying early on in the Trump, when Trump first went into office, there were some things that I said he was going to do. And she was like, he can't do that. He's not allowed to do that. And he did it. And I said, you know what? The reason why I know that is because I'm from the Deep South and we live with Trump every day. Like, Trump is not a new phenomenon to us. There are many Trumps, i.e. Lindsey Graham, i.e. I can go down the list. The bottom line is that all of us can be disenfranchised just by having a bad leader that puts himself in a position of and abuses his power in a way that he undermines democracy. None of us are immune from that when we let the very fabric of protecting democracy be unraveled. And so when we don't fight for the voting rights of African Americans or Native Americans or any American in this country, we leave ourselves, all of us, vulnerable to not just voter suppression, but vulnerable to the dismantling of democracy. So I'm hoping that at the end of the day, what I want people to do, if they could just take this one phrase and let this start driving our politics: for the love of humanity. What would policy look like if we start operating and saying, I'm going to support this policy for the love of humanity? And what I mean by that is, even when I vote, I don't vote based on what I think about my tax bracket, like not like I'm at some high tax bracket or anything I'm implying. But the fact of the matter is, when I vote, I am always voting for the most vulnerable in my community, because I know that if there's a safety net for the most vulnerable of us, then the rest of us will also benefit from that. And so I am hoping that in this moment, that what this coalition will see themselves as is beyond the confinements of a party affiliation, beyond the confinements of what we see ourselves as race and gender, that beyond that, that at the end of the day, at the core of our humanity, that as we go forward talking about governance, that we govern in a way for the love of humanity, that we create and demand policies that all people. What's so wrong with everybody having health care? I'm so confused around that. I don't even understand why that's a debate. Why would we not want everybody to have health care? At the end of the day, worst case scenario, people can get sick, people can get well. I mean, like.
And finally, let's just take a look at the cabinet Biden has announced so far. Right off the bat, you can see a team that is much more representative of our nation as a whole. How many of these people can you name? If you're up on the news, I'm sure you could name quite a few. Personally, if I bumped into more than half of these people on the street, I wouldn't recognize them. But isn't that as it should be? I mean, come on, I know far too many names from the Trump administration, and not for anything good either. Now, they do tend to skew towards the older side of the spectrum, and many of them are recycled from the Obama administration. But you know what? Our federal government is so broken, from education to the EPA to housing to justice. We need experienced people who can right the ship right away. We don't have time for a learning curve right now, and I, for one, am very excited by what's to come. So let's move on to some topics much closer to home. The interviews we have lined up are with some of the best guests we've ever had. The Greenwood Diversity Group is such a positive force in our community. Ann Parks was generous with her time to let us know what's happening in Columbia, and Mandy Powers Norrell, just wow. You will definitely want to stay for that. So, without further ado,